In the grand and often sanguinary theater of history, some figures are destined to become symbols, their lives and deeds transcending mere chronicle to become potent allegories. They are the cautionary tales, the exemplars of defiance, the living embodiments of justice or ruin. And among these, few images are as stark, as visceral, or as eternally shocking as that of a queen, her face a mask of terrible grief and colder resolve, holding the severed head of the world's most powerful man over a wineskin brimming with human blood. This is not the stuff of mythic fantasy, but the brutal culmination of a story written on the arid steppes of Central Asia in the 6th century before the Common Era. It is the story of Tamaris, queen of the Massagetes, and her ghastly, definitive answer to the ambition of Cyrus the Great. We are told that Cyrus was a revolutionary, a benevolent conqueror, the architect of a new kind of empire. But how does such a man, a figure lauded for his mercy and vision, end up as a headless corpse in the dust, his legacy forever stained by the vengeance of a woman he dismissed as a barbarian? This is not merely a tale of a single battle. It is the story of a clash of worlds, of the collision between the settled, expansionist ambition of empire and the fierce, unyielding spirit of the nomad. It is an investigation into the anatomy of hubris and the terrible, transformative power of a mother's grief. To understand the bloody climax, we must first understand the insult that birthed it and the woman who delivered it. The world of Tamaris was one sculpted by wind and sky, a realm of immense, unforgiving landscapes that stretched from the Caspian Sea eastward into the heart of Asia. This was the domain of the Massagetes, a people whose name has been debated by scholars for millennia, but whose character was etched into the very earth they roamed. They were a Scythian confederation, nomadic pastoralists whose existence was a testament to resilience and adaptation. Their wealth was not in gold-filled treasuries or sprawling cities of stone, but in vast herds of sheep and cattle that followed the seasons across the steppe. Their homes were felt-covered wagons, mobile hearths that carried the essence of their community across endless grasslands. Life was hard, dictated by the rhythm of migration, the availability of pasture, and the constant need for vigilance against rival tribes and the harshness of nature itself. This environment did not breed softness. It forged people who were tough, self-reliant, and fiercely independent, with a profound connection to the land that sustained them, a land they considered not a territory to be owned, but a sacred trust to be traversed. At the heart of Massagetean culture was the horse. They were among the most skilled equestrians the ancient world had ever seen, practically born into the saddle. A Massagetean warrior was a centaur-like figure, a seamless union of rider and mount, capable of firing arrows with deadly accuracy at a full gallop. Their military doctrine was not one of pitched battles with organized infantry lines, but of fluid, lightning-fast cavalry raids. They would harry their enemies, feign retreats to lure them into ambushes, and unleash storms of arrows from their powerful composite bows before melting back into the steppes that were their greatest fortress. They fought to defend their grazing lands, their herds, and their freedom, and they did so with a ferocity that was legendary. Herodotus, the Greek historian who provides the most detailed account of these events, notes their customs with a mixture of fascination and civilized horror. They worshipped a single deity, the sun, to whom they sacrificed horses, the swiftest of mortal creatures for the swiftest of gods. Their social customs were, to a Greek mind, alien. They practiced a form of communal marriage, and when a man grew old, his kinsmen would sacrifice him along with some cattle, boiling the meat and feasting upon it, believing this to be the most blessed of ends, to be consumed by one's family rather than left to the ravages of sickness or the teeth of wolves. It was into this world of brutal pragmatism and untamed liberty that Tamaris came to power. We know little of her early life, but the fact of her rule speaks volumes. In a society that prized martial prowess above all else, for a woman to hold the throne meant she must have possessed extraordinary qualities of leadership, wisdom, and indomitable will. Her husband, the former king, had died, leaving her not as a mere regent for her son, Spartopizes, but as the supreme authority in her own right. She was the chieftain of chieftains, the ultimate arbiter of her people's destiny. She must have commanded the absolute respect of her warriors, men who would not follow weakness or hesitation into battle. She was the guardian of their way of life, the living symbol of the sovereignty of the Massagetes, a people who had never bowed to a foreign master. For years, she had likely ruled in relative peace, her authority confined to the vast, windswept plains east of the Araxes River, a great waterway that served as a natural and psychological border between her world and the burgeoning empires to the south and west. And what an empire it was! To the south, beyond the river, lay the dominion of a man whose name was already legend, Cyrus, king of the Achaemenid Persians. In a remarkably short period, Cyrus had forged the largest empire the world had yet seen. He was a figure of breathtaking ambition and revolutionary genius. He had conquered the Medes, subjugated the wealthy kingdom of Lydia under its fabulously rich king, Croesus, and, most spectacularly, had taken the ancient, impregnable city of Babylon without a major fight. But Cyrus was different from the Assyrian and Babylonian tyrants who had preceded him. His method of rule was one of comparative tolerance and integration. He famously allowed the captive Jews in Babylon to return to their homeland and rebuild their temple, earning him the title of a Messiah in their scriptures. He respected the local customs and religions of the peoples he conquered, understanding that a lighter touch could ensure greater stability and loyalty than sheer terror. He was a master of propaganda, presenting himself not as a brutal conqueror, but as a chosen restorer of order and righteousness. His public image was that of a wise, merciful, and divinely favored lawgiver, the father of a new global order. Yet, beneath the velvet glove of enlightened governance lay an iron fist of insatiable ambition. By 530 BCE, Cyrus had consolidated his vast gains. From the Aegean Sea to the Indus Valley, his authority was absolute. He was the Shahanshah, the king of kings, a monarch whose power seemed limitless. But for a man like Cyrus, a frontier was not a boundary. It was a challenge. An unconquered people were not a neighbor to be respected, but a loose thread in the perfect tapestry of his empire. His gaze turned northeast, across the Araxes River, to the vast, unknown lands of the Massagetes. They were the last significant independent power on his northern border, and their existence was an affront to his vision of a unified world under Persian dominion. He had subdued cities, kingdoms, and entire civilizations. How could a tribe of nomadic horsemen possibly stand in his way? His entire life had been a series of victories, a confirmation of his manifest destiny. This string of successes had bred in him a profound, almost religious, self-confidence. He was not merely a king. He was an instrument of cosmic order, and the Massagetes were simply the next line in his grand historical ledger. This lethal combination of genuine talent, immense power, and unchecked hubris set the stage for the tragedy to come. The first move was not one of war, but of insidious diplomacy. Cyrus was a master of using marriage as a tool of statecraft, a way to absorb kingdoms without bloodshed by co-opting their ruling lines. He dispatched envoys to the court of Tamaris, which was likely a grand encampment of richly decorated wagons and tents, a mobile capital that was the heart of the Massagetès nation. The proposal they carried was simple and, on its surface, a great honor. The King of Kings, the master of the known world, sought the hand of the barbarian queen in marriage. An alliance between the two peoples, a union of the greatest sedentary empire and the most formidable nomadic confederation, would secure the peace and bring prosperity to all. It was a tempting offer, a path to security and immense prestige. A lesser leader might have been flattered, intimidated, or swayed by the promise of Persian wealth and power. But Tamaris was not a lesser leader. She was a shrewd political operator who had survived and thrived in the unforgiving world of steppe politics. She understood power in its rawest forms, and she could smell the predator beneath the diplomat's silks. She looked at the offer from Cyrus and saw it for exactly what it was, a prelude to annexation. She knew that Cyrus did not woo her, the woman, but rather the kingdom of the Massagetæ. A marriage would make her a subordinate, a client queen. Her son, Spargopizes, would become a hostage to Persian influence, and her warriors would eventually be folded into the Persian military machine as auxiliaries. Their freedom, their unique way of life, their very identity would be slowly, inexorably eroded. She had not guarded her people's independence from rival tribes only to surrender it to a smiling emperor from the south. Her response was unequivocal and devoid of diplomatic pleasantries. She rejected the proposal outright. In a message sent back to the Persian king, she warned him to be content with his own vast domains and to leave her people to rule themselves. It was a stunning act of defiance, a direct rebuke to the most powerful man on earth. Thamyris had drawn a line in the sands along the Araxes River. She had chosen freedom over vassalage, confrontation over submission. Cyrus, for his part, was likely both infuriated and undeterred. The diplomatic mask had been cast aside, revealing the conqueror's face beneath. If the Massagetæ would not submit willingly, they would be broken by force. He had built his empire on the calculation that no one could ultimately withstand the might of the Persian army, and he saw no reason to believe this nomadic queen would be the exception. He began to march his immense, multi-ethnic army, composed of Persians, Medes, Lydians, Babylonians, and countless others, northeast toward the Araxes. The full weight of the Achaemenid war machine, an entity that had crushed ancient kingdoms, was now directed at a people who lived in tents. As his engineers began the monumental task of constructing a bridge of boats to ferry his army across the wide, swift river, he was effectively declaring war. The turning point had been reached. The polite fiction of alliance was dead, and the grim reality of invasion had begun. As the Persian army massed on the far bank, a clear and present threat to her people's existence, Thamyris sent Cyrus another message. It was a bold and confident challenge, rooted in the warrior ethics of the steppe. She offered him a choice of battlefield. "King of the Medes," her herald proclaimed, "I give you a choice. Either allow us to retreat 3 days' march into our land, and you may cross to meet us there, or, if you would rather fight on your own territory, you retreat 3 days' march, and we will cross to meet you." This was more than a strategic proposal. It was a psychological test. She was displaying no fear, offering her enemy the chance to fight on his own terms, as if the outcome were a matter of course. She was projecting an aura of strength and honorable conduct, framing the coming conflict as a noble contest of arms, a trial by combat between two sovereigns. Cyrus convened a council of his highest-ranking generals and advisors to debate the queen's audacious offer. The consensus among his Persian nobles was immediate and predictable. Let the barbarians come. Lure Thamyris and her army across the river onto Persian soil. They are on familiar ground. They could be annihilated. It was the safe, conventional military wisdom. But there was one dissenting voice in the council, a voice that carried the weight of bitter experience. This was Croesus, the former king of Lydia. Years earlier, Croesus had been the one to misinterpret a prophecy from the oracle at Delphi, which had told him that if he crossed the Halys River to attack Persia, he would destroy a great empire. He had crossed, and the empire he destroyed was his own. Defeated and captured, he was spared by Cyrus and had since become a permanent fixture in the Persian court, a trophy, a curiosity, and a source of world-weary, often melancholic, advice. Croesus stood before Cyrus and argued passionately against the prevailing opinion. He warned the king that allowing the Massagetæ to cross would risk the entire Persian army. If they lost the battle on their own soil, the defeat would be catastrophic. The victorious nomads would sweep into the heart of the empire. But even if the Persians won, he argued, the victory would be hollow. They would have merely pushed back a tribe of nomads. There was no great city to capture, no treasure to loot. The gain was minimal, the risk immense. Instead, Croesus offered a different, more cunning strategy. He advised Cyrus to accept Tomyris' offer to cross into her territory. Once there, he should advance one day's march and set up a deliberately tempting camp. He should leave behind the weakest contingent of his army and stock the camp lavishly with all the luxuries the Persians possessed: roasted meats, fine breads, and, most importantly, an abundance of strong, undiluted wine. The Massagetæ, Croesus reasoned, were a simple people unfamiliar with such delicacies and used to drinking only milk. They would fall upon the feast, gorge themselves, and drink themselves into a stupor. Once they were incapacitated, Cyrus could return with his main force and slaughter them with ease. This, Croesus suggested, would be a victory worthy of your name, and it would deliver the first blow against them. Cyrus listened to both arguments. He had a choice between a straightforward, honorable battle and a victory won through deception and the exploitation of his enemies' supposed cultural backwardness. The hubris that had led him to this frontier now guided his hand. He dismissed the cautious counsel of his Persian generals and embraced the cunning, dishonorable plan proposed by Croesus. He saw in a way to not only defeat the Massagetæ, but to humiliate them, to prove their inferiority. He sent a message back to Tomyris, informing her that he would cross the river. He instructed her to withdraw her forces as promised. Tomyris, true to her word, pulled her army back from the riverbank, granting the Persian king undisputed passage into her lands. She expected a battle of warriors. She was about to be given a lesson in the treacherous statecraft of empire. The Persian army crossed the Araxes on their newly constructed bridge, a tide of men and steel pouring into the vast, open plains of the Massagetæ. Cyrus followed Croesus's plan to the letter. He advanced a day's march, found a suitable location, and established a camp designed to be an irresistible trap. He left behind his least effective soldiers, the men considered most expendable, and filled the tents with an opulent feast. Carafes of dark, potent wine, a drink the Massagetæ had never encountered in such quantity or strength, were placed in prominent view. Then Cyrus withdrew his elite troops, the hardened core of his army, and concealed them a safe distance away, waiting for the trap to be sprung. He also took one further precaution. He entrusted his own son and heir, Cambyses, to the care of Croesus, ordering the old Lydian king to take the boy back to Persia and to treat him well should the campaign go awry. It was a flicker of foresight in a mind clouded by arrogance, a tacit acknowledgement that he was stepping into a dangerous and unknown land. The bait was set. Tomyris, seeing the Persian advance halt and a portion of their army apparently left behind, dispatched her own forces to engage them. This detachment was not a mere scouting party. It was a third of her total army, a significant force, and it was commanded by her own son, the Prince Spargopizes. He was a young man, likely eager to prove his valor and win glory against the legendary Persian invaders. He led his horsemen in a thunderous charge upon the Persian camp. The resistance they met was, as planned, token. The expendable Persian soldiers were quickly overwhelmed and slaughtered. The Massagetæ warriors, flushed with an easy victory, swarmed into the abandoned camp. And there, they discovered a paradise of earthly delights they had never imagined. The scene that followed was one of joyous, naive indulgence that quickly spiraled into debauchery. The warriors, who knew only the harsh sustenance of the steppe, milk, dried meat, and perhaps a fermented mare's milk beverage of low alcoholic content, found themselves surrounded by roasted lamb, fine baked goods, and endless supplies of intoxicating wine. They feasted and drank with abandon, celebrating their victory. The potent drink quickly clouded their judgment and dulled their senses. Spargopizes, their commander, was no more immune than his men. The victorious army dissolved into a drunken, slumbering mob, completely unaware of the doom that was creeping back towards them through the darkness. Under the cover of night, Cyrus returned with his main army. They fell upon the camp like wolves upon a sleeping flock. There was no battle, only a massacre. The Massagetæ warriors, sodden with wine and deep in sleep, were cut down where they lay. It was a wholesale slaughter, a victory without honor. A great many were killed, but Cyrus had given specific orders for the enemy commander. Spartapizes, the prince, was not to be killed. He was found in a drunken stupor and taken alive, bound in chains. He was the ultimate prize, a hostage who would surely break his mother's will to fight. Cyrus had won the first round through pure, unadulterated treachery. He had captured the queen's son and decimated a third of her army without risking his own best men. In his mind, the war was already as good as over. When news of the disaster and her son's capture reached Tomarus, her world collapsed. The initial reports must have been a whirlwind of horror and disbelief. An easy victory had turned into a catastrophic defeat. Her warriors were dead, and her beloved son, the heir to her throne and the future of her people, was a captive in the hands of the man who had come to destroy them. Her immediate reaction was not one of submission, but of white-hot rage, a fury amplified by a mother's primal fear and grief. She immediately dispatched a herald to Cyrus, her message stripped of all pretense of diplomacy. It was a raw, emotional cry from a wounded sovereign. She accused Cyrus of winning not through courage or martial skill, but through deceit and the cowardly use of the fruit of the vine, which drove men to madness. Her message was both a plea and a chilling threat. "Listen to me now," she commanded, "and I give you good advice. Give me back my son and leave this land unpunished, for you have disgraced a third of the Macedonian army through treachery. If you will not do this, then I swear by the sun, the Lord of the Macedonians, that for all your insatiable thirst for blood, I will give you your fill of it." This was the oath of a woman pushed past the brink. She was no longer just a queen defending her territory. She was a mother demanding the return of her child, and she was invoking the highest power she knew to sanctify her vow of vengeance. She was promising Cyrus a consequence so total, so absolute, that it would satisfy even his legendary lust for conquest, but in the most gruesome way imaginable. Cyrus received the message with contemptuous indifference. He was the victor. He held all the cards. The queen's threats were, to him, the impotent ravings of a defeated woman. He utterly dismissed her ultimatum. He had Spartapizes, and he believed this was the key to Tomarus' surrender. Meanwhile, in the Persian camp, the effects of the wine began to wear off. Spartapizes awoke from his drunken haze to find himself, in chains, a prisoner. The full weight of his situation crashed down upon him. He was not a captive taken in honorable battle, but a commander who had led his men into a foolish, gluttonous trap. He had disgraced himself, his mother, and his people. The shame was a poison far more potent than the wine. He understood that his life was now a tool to be used against his own mother, to force her into submission. The humiliation was more than he could bear. According to Herodotus, he asked Cyrus to be unbound. Perhaps Cyrus, in a moment of arrogant magnanimity, granted the request, thinking it a sign of the prince's broken spirit. The moment his hands were free, Spartapizes seized a nearby sword and took his own life. He chose a swift, self-inflicted death over a life of dishonor and being used as a pawn against his own kin. The news of her son's suicide was the final, devastating blow for Tomarus. The last flicker of hope that she might rescue him was extinguished. Her grief was now absolute, a black hole of loss and rage that consumed every other thought, every other political calculation. The war was no longer about territory or sovereignty. It had become a deeply personal vendetta. Cyrus had not just invaded her land. He had tricked, captured, and driven her only son to his death. The queen's vow of vengeance, sworn by the sun, was now no longer a threat. It was a sacred, unbreakable covenant. She was transformed. The shrewd defender of the nation became the avatar of its wrath. A grieving mother who would now mobilize every last resource of her people to fulfill her terrible promise. She gathered all her remaining forces, every man capable of riding a horse and drawing a bow. There would be no more maneuvering, no more strategic withdrawals. This would be a final, decisive confrontation, a battle of annihilation. The two armies finally met in the heart of the Massagetan plains. On one side stood the vast, disciplined, and multi-ethnic imperial army of Persia, a force that had conquered half the world, led by a king who had never known ultimate defeat. On the other stood the entire remaining host of the Massagetan, a smaller but unified force of nomadic horsemen fighting on their home ground, for their very survival, and under the command of a queen consumed by a righteous and terrible fury. The battle that ensued was, in the words of Herodotus, the most violent and obstinately fought contest between non-Greek peoples in history. It was a cataclysm of savagery and desperation. The engagement began, as was typical for steppe warfare, at a distance. The two armies faced each other and unleashed a blinding storm of arrows. For a long time, neither side gave way, simply standing their ground and firing until their quivers were empty. The air would have been thick with the whistle of shafts and the screams of men and horses struck down from afar. When their missiles were exhausted, the real carnage began. They dropped their bows, drew their swords and spears, and crashed into one another. This was no longer a battle of maneuver, but a brutal, grinding melee, a chaotic swirl of hand-to-hand combat where skill and ferocity were all that mattered. The Persians, with their heavy infantry and disciplined formations, likely expected to break the nomadic charge. But the Massagetan, fueled by desperation and the incandescent rage of their queen, fought with a suicidal bravery. They were defending their families, their freedom, and avenging their prince. The struggle raged for hours, a chaotic and bloody affair, with no quarter asked and none given. The disciplined ranks of the Persians, so effective against the armies of Lydia and Babylon, began to waver and then break under the relentless, frenzied assault. The tide of battle turned decisively against the invaders. The Persian army, so far from home and surrounded by a hostile population, lost its cohesion. The line shattered. Soldiers began to flee in panic, but on the open steppe, there was nowhere to run. The swift Massagetan horsemen would have pursued them relentlessly, cutting them down as they tried to escape. In the heart of this swirling chaos, the unthinkable happened. Cyrus the Great, the King of Kings, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, the conqueror of nations, was killed. We do not know the exact manner of his death, whether he was struck by a stray arrow, cut down by a nameless warrior, or fell in a desperate last stand with his royal guards. All we know is that he fell, his life bleeding out into the dust of the land he had so arrogantly tried to conquer. With his death, the Persian army completely collapsed. The defeat was not just a setback, it was an absolute catastrophe. The vast majority of the invading force was wiped out, annihilated along with their king. For Thamyris, the news of the victory and Cyrus's death was not a cause for celebration. It was the signal for the final act of her promised retribution. The battle was won, but her vow to the sun was not yet fulfilled. She gave a grim order to her warriors: find the body of Cyrus. They scoured the corpse-strewn battlefield, a ghastly landscape of dead men and horses, turning over the bodies of the Persian nobles and guards until they located the mortal remains of the great king himself. His body was brought before the queen. Thamyris, looking down at the lifeless form of the man who had caused her such profound anguish, felt no triumph, only the cold, hard imperative of her oath. She had prepared for this moment. She commanded her attendants to bring her a wineskin, a common vessel made from animal hide. But this was no ordinary wineskin. It had been filled not with wine or water, but with the collected blood of slain Persian soldiers. It was a grotesque chalice, a symbol of the very thing she had accused Cyrus of craving. Her warriors then decapitated the corpse of the fallen king. Thamyris took the severed head of Cyrus the Great in her hands. Staring into its lifeless eyes, she pronounced the chilling words that would echo through the annals of history, a final, horrifying address to her dead enemy. "Though I have survived the battle and conquered you," she declared, "you have still destroyed me by taking my son through treachery. But as I threatened, so I shall do. I will quench your insatiable thirst for blood. With that, she plunged Cyrus's head deep into the wineskin, submerging it in the gore of his own men. The act was a piece of shocking, symbolic theater. It was not merely an execution or a post-mortem desecration. It was a ritual, a ghastly sacrament that fulfilled her sacred oath and served as a permanent, visceral statement against the boundless ambition that had brought him to her lands. She had given the world conqueror his fill of blood, and in doing so, had created an image of vengeance so powerful it would never be forgotten. The immediate aftermath of the battle was the frantic, desperate retreat of the few Persian survivors who managed to escape the slaughter. They carried with them the terrifying news of the king's death and the annihilation of his army. The story of Cyrus's humiliating end at the hands of a barbarian queen and the subsequent desecration of his body sent shockwaves across the ancient world. For the Achaemenid Empire, it was an existential crisis. The founder, the near-mythical figure upon whom the entire imperial edifice was built, was gone, his body unrecovered and his funeral rites unperformed, a matter of profound religious and political significance for the Persians. The official story had to be managed. It is no surprise, then, that alternative accounts of Cyrus's death began to circulate, likely originating from the Persian court itself, desperate to sanitize the legacy of their founder. The Greek writer Xenophon, in his hagiographic work the Cyropaedia, presents a completely different narrative, one in which Cyrus dies peacefully in his bed, an old man surrounded by his family, delivering wise final speeches. Ctesias, another Greek physician at the Persian court, claimed Cyrus died from a wound sustained in battle against a different people entirely. These stories represent a clear effort at historical revisionism, a propaganda campaign to erase the embarrassing and horrifying truth. The official narrative of the empire could not accommodate the reality that their great founder, the paragon of wisdom and military genius, had been outmaneuvered, defeated, and grotesquely dishonored by a woman he had fatally underestimated. The Persian state needed a venerable patriarch who died in glory, not a headless corpse whose thirst was quenched in a bag of blood. Despite these efforts, it is the visceral, brutal account of Herodotus that has endured with the most force. It survived precisely because of its dramatic power and its profound moral resonance. The story of Tomyris and Cyrus became a timeless parable about the dangers of hubris, and the inevitable retribution, nemesis, that follows. For the Greeks, and later the Romans, Tomyris became a potent symbol. She was the barbarian queen who had humbled the greatest of kings, a figure of terrifying but admirable resolve. Artists from the Renaissance to the neoclassical period, from Peter Paul Rubens to Gustave Moreau, would return to the image of the queen and the severed head again and again, captivated by its mixture of horror, justice, and tragic grandeur. What, then, is the ultimate legacy of Tomyris? In the short term, her victory was absolute. She secured the independence of the Massagetæ for at least another generation. The Persian Empire, under Cyrus's successor Cambyses, turned its attention south to Egypt rather than risk another disastrous campaign on the northeastern steppes. Tomyris had successfully defended her people and her way of life. But her story is more than a mere military victory. It is a powerful counter-narrative to the great man theory of history. It reminds us that history is not solely shaped by the deeds of famous emperors and generals, but also by those who resist them. She emerges from the mists of antiquity as a rare female leader whose story is defined not by her relationship to powerful men, but by her defiance of one. Her actions, while undeniably brutal, must be understood within their context. The desecration of Cyrus's body was a response to a profound betrayal. Cyrus had broken the unspoken rules of honorable warfare by using deceit. He had caused the death of her son, an act that transformed a political conflict into a personal one. Her vengeance, therefore, was not just a fit of rage, but a calculated act of symbolic justice, speaking in a language of violence and ritual that she knew the world would understand. It was a message, written in blood, to all future would-be conquerors. that the price of ambition could be devastatingly high, and that the will to be free can inspire a resistance more ferocious than any army. The story of Thamyris forces us to look beyond the sanitized portraits of great conquerors and confront the human cost of their ambition. Cyrus the Great may have been a liberator to the Jews and a wise administrator to the Babylonians, but to the Massagetæ, he was a treacherous invader who brought nothing but sorrow and death. Thamyris stands as a monument to that overlooked perspective. She is the grieving mother, the defiant queen, the avenger who held power to account in the most visceral way imaginable. Her tragic victory leaves us with an enduring and unsettling reflection on the nature of power, justice, and memory. In the end, Cyrus, the man who craved the entire world, could not even keep his own head. And Thamyris, the queen he thought he could easily discard, is the one who, by her terrible and unforgettable act, ensured his story would forever be intertwined with hers, a permanent testament to the day a nomad queen gave an emperor his fill of blood.